Everybody wants to get united. Like, what we gotta do is meet everybody on 149th Street at the bench.
Today I want to do something we haven't done in quite some time. I want to break down the work of a phenomenal graffiti artist, somebody I recently found out about who's got some incredible work. Now in today's video, I want to take a second to show you guys 2 different advanced techniques you can start doing in your graffiti today. For those of you guys who struggle to read graffiti, here's the letters. You got the G right here in white, you got the R in blue, the A in yellow, the C followed by the E. And one of the very first things that hops out to me is that he's working with a 5-letter name here, and notice how the center letter is positioned higher up, more so than all of the other letters. Alright, so let's tackle the very first thing here, which is why is the A positioned so high up, and what does this allow him to do? Well, one of the very first things that kind of sticks out to me is how he's able to really make the A flow with line uniformity and similarity. And this not only tethers the R together with the A and the C, but it also drags into the C as well. Holy crap, this even get, alright, I didn't even notice that. It gets into the G as well. So that kind of tethers everything together. This is awesome. So check this out. We have this line of the G as well as this line right here of the G. Now those 2 lines right there flow perfectly with line uniformity and similarity directly into this line right here as far as this top line, and as far as this line is concerned, it flows with similarity on this part of the R. Now this part of the R flows with this and this, as to where this part right here leads directly into this part of the A and flows with this right here, which honestly flows with that as well. So he's got a lot of flow going directly into those areas. But then check this out, because of the positioning of the A, he's able to take this crossbar right there and he's able to move it higher up than it would have otherwise been had he had the A positioned with all the other letters. The crossbar would have been somewhere around here, which, yeah, sure, he could have made it flow in that, way as well, but because the A is so high up, it allows him to take the C and nudge it ever so slightly closer to the leg of the R. Now this is really important because what he ends up doing here is he takes this line of the R, which goes in a diagonal direction, and he lines it up directly with the C. Look at that. That's perfect right there. And this is really important because those lines right there have line uniformity and similarity with this part of the E. But let's get back to our white lines. What's happening there? How does that tether into everything? So when we keep this flow motion going with the C, it goes directly onto the top of the C, which flows with similarity right here. So this line flows more so with momentum and the flow of movement, like the actual movement of the lines and the direction, the trajectory, if you will, of the line work itself, as to where this one flows more so with the uniformity and similarity. Now, something I really want to point out is a lot of amateurs, they tend to just throw extensions and exterior details willy-nilly. They don't really give it any thought as to where these things are being placed. But check out how he uses this more sharp exterior detail that layers over his E. Notice how it lines directly up with all those white lines, and that white line right there. Not only that, but it also follows the same trajectory, as both of these green lines can be a continuation of this white line right here. And that's amazing. That's perfect. That's incredible. That's really awesome. And on top of that, it even goes directly into this as well, which is even better because he takes another exterior detail, wow, that sentence was hard, and puts it on the bottom left of the G, which has line uniformity and similarity with those same green lines. Look at that. Beautiful flow. That right there is why I love this piece and why I really admire Grace's work. They got some phenomenal stuff. But something I really want to point out, and one of the things that really appealed to me in this piece, is not only the fact that he's working with a G and an R, which I happen to also have, but it's also how he uses suggested structure and letter distortions. Kind of like segments and cuts a piece off of his R and then replaces it with something totally different from a different letter structure entirely. And notice the key word there, a different letter structure entirely. He's not replacing it with an extension or anything of the sort. He's using a different letter structure to suggest and complete the letter structure of the R that he amputated. We have the center of the R, which comes right into there, and then that means that the stem of the R has to be here and it has to come down through here. Alright, so that right there is the stem of the R. The only issue is this part is amputated because the majority of it, not all of it, but the majority of it has been completely obscured out of our vision. The reason for that is because he takes this line of the G, which would be the equivalent of this burgundy line right there, and he layers it on top of the leg of the R. Now, this is a really tricky thing in graffiti where a lot of graffiti artists end up just straight up destroying their letters by doing this. When you take a letter structure and you completely cover a really important section of it, more times than not, you're just going to destroy the letter. Let's actually run through a little bit of a test right here. This right here illustrates the point perfectly. Pause the video if you have to, but look at these 2 examples and tell me which one of those burgundy letters is a C. You can't tell. You don't know which one of those is a C or which one of those is an O. Why? Because the black letter is layered on top of it obscuring your vision. You can't see what's happening underneath that. So if we were to move these two black letters further away, you'd be able to see which one is which letter. But he's got a couple things working in his favor. The first of which is the fact that he's not really overlapping this a crazy amount. We can still see little bits and pieces of the R poking underneath, which is great. That's actually kind of necessary in this case. But on top of that, he continues the R's structure by just breaking the outline ever so slightly in this area right here, which allows the G and the R to connect. Even if it didn't, even if that was a bold outline, it wouldn't really matter because it still continues the flow of motion for the R's structure. And as a result, this piece right here suggests the R's structure and compensates for the lack of structure that we have here, which that's pretty cool. That's pretty awesome. Now that's only one example of something really advanced that you can do with your work where you suggest structure using other things. We've actually seen this in Softless's work in a past video as well. But later in the video, I'm going to share a different advanced technique that you can try on your graffiti as well. For now though, let's move into this image right here. I love this. I'm a big fan of when graffiti artists mix other art forms into their work. There's the letters for you right there. Now this is something I also want to point out, is the fact that you don't have to add style to every single letter in your hand style. Now we've been working on the hand style book. I've been thinking a lot about tags, so it's kind of something that I really wanted to share with you guys in today's video. Take a look at this G, for example, right? This G is just a basic structure G. Nothing fancy about it. There's not even a serif on this thing. It's quite literally the most basic form of a G you can possibly have. The C is also your most absolute basic structure, with once again, no serif on this thing, which he could have added, but he didn't. Those two letters are as plain as can possibly be, yet it's still a pretty dope hand style. There's really nothing fancy happening with the R. The only thing that's really stylized about it is the fact that the bowl doesn't connect to the stem right here at the top, which otherwise, you know, would be your standard R. Instead, he opted not to do that because instead he takes this line and drags it all the way up and around for the top of the R, which this also would be a little bit of a stylistic flair, but even that's very minimal at most. And the E is just a variant structure E, nothing really fancy going on there. To not beat around the bush, my point being, you can still get really nice results with your hand style, very effective tags with very minimal amounts of style. And Grace does that really well. You might say Grace does that gracefully. Now for the last piece. There's two advanced things I really want to show you guys here. But before we get into that, let's at very least point out the letters for those guys who are newer to graffiti. So you got the G right here in the beginning in white. The R looks a little bit funky, but I'm going to explain that. And then you got the A, C, E pretty much the same way that he did them in the first piece, where the A is a little bit higher up. So remember in the first piece, he obscured the bottom left of the R with the G. Similar thing is happening here, with the G has that little thing that comes out right there, and then the R quite literally shifts itself over with a very skinny line right here, and then it continues the stem downward in this direction. That way at least it doesn't get in the way or get obscured by this line of the G. Now let's get into the one thing I really want to point out. Oftentimes in graffiti, you find graffiti artists use lines in order to make different differentiations within their image, whether it's, you know, a line in order to differentiate the A from this part of the R, or whether it's using a line here in order to differentiate this part of the G from this part of the R. Lines are there in order to define things. They're able to establish different areas of our image. But in realism, we don't really use lines. Instead, we used values as well as contrast in order to differentiate different elements in our image. So graffiti artists can do much of the same exact thing, and we see Grace do that amazingly, not only with the lightning in his image defining the outline of his letters without actually being your more traditional outline, but we also see him do this right here in the G and the R combo, where he's able to establish this as being structure just from the contrast in values from this lighter area to this darker area. And now when we turn the image black and white, we can see that perfectly, and that allows him to pull both of these directly past the G for this extrusion right there. Now this is great and phenomenal because it allows you, in order to do things like that, in order to make extrusions, in order to pull letter structures in different directions without being too intrusive on another letter, without needing to overlap and obscure another letter. Could you imagine if he had this line just completely cross over? Well, look at that. Look at how much different that looks. Look at how that obscures the letter structure of not only the G, but the R itself. That's a very intrusive thing to do. So instead, you just opt to get rid of those lines, contrast, and boom, there you go. You establish letter structure without obscuring any letter structure. You get the best of both worlds. And doing something like that can allow you to generate flow with line uniformity and similarity in more difficult to reach areas that you necessarily weren't able to reach before. And look at that. Look at how now that flow travels beautifully throughout the image as a whole. Gorgeously done. Lastly, fun little tip, last advanced little thing I wanted to share with you guys. He's got the 3D going in different directions. You might see this and go, oh, isn't that 3D wrong, John? Isn't that not right? Well, here's the trick. Well, yes, some graffiti artists do their 3D going in different directions, and that definitively is wrong in most cases. The difference is those little chips there aren't attached to the actual piece themselves. When you have different objects in life, you can take these objects and rotate them in different directions, and they still work within perspective. However, if you were to slap one object on the other object and they're attached to one another, well, now they move in unison, right? So when you have 3D on a letter, the 3D moves in unison with itself. But if you make a chip out of something, well, now these things are independent of one another and can rotate in their own directions. But dudes, if you want to check out more of Grace's work, check him out in the description down below. I got a link over to his Instagram. And while you're down there, pick up one of the ebooks we made or the brush packs. They are phenomenal. I'll be honest, man, the brush packs are sick. But dudes, if you want the best how to do graffiti tutorials anywhere online, check out this top playlist with more graffiti content right down here, and I'll catch you guys back here next week. Thanks for watching.